We have a fantastic panel ahead of you, and also we are launching this report, which all of you will see on your tables, titled Regional Integration in the Indo-Pacific, Connectivity, Cooperation, and New Supply Chain Linkages. Before we have a formal launch of the report, may I request the panelists today, your names are here in front, and also the minister who's right in the middle to join us perhaps on stage, and maybe we can do a quick photo launch with the report. Thank you. May I request the panel to be seated, and may I invite you, Watanabe-san, for your briefing.
Yeah. Good morning, honored ministers, excellencies, distinguished friends, my esteemed partners at the ORF, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. At the outset, allow me to congratulate the government of India and the ORF for raising the Raisina Dialogue to eminent levels over the years. Equally, my congratulations to the organized team for bringing the Indo-Pacific at the forefront of the Raisina Dialogue. My institute is an international organization located at the heart of ASEAN in Jakarta. AREA's research shaped the economic policy dialogue among governments in the Indo-Pacific and provide a knowledge and advocacy component for diversified and resilient supply chain in the changing geopolitical landscape. AREA brings the voices, priorities, and realities of ASEAN and the Global South into the global discourse. The study on regional integration in the Indo-Pacific is an outcome of this mandate. Ladies and gentlemen, economic dynamics of the Indo-Pacific is left vulnerable to geopolitical risks affecting the efficiencies and the return sought by the markets. The conflation of strategic and economic activities has resulted in a need for diversified, resilient supply chains in this region. In that regard, India and ASEAN have a specific role offering its production capacities for such diversified, resilient, and even trustworthy supply chain for its partners across the world. The Make in India program is increasingly become a reality, and key sectors such as semiconductor, automobile, and critical minerals are unlocking new levels of investment potential here in India. India and ASEAN stand out as an emerging economic powerhouse and one of the only bright spots in a slowing global economy. Connectivity is integral to this concept of a developed and resilient Indo-Pacific, or for that matter, to any development agenda. The transformational changes in global governance, international relations, and the aspiration of young demography, technological connectivity, and the future of work are driving the current discourse on connectivity. Infrastructure plans that underlie the economic architecture in the Indo-Pacific will influence the governance, standards, transparency, accountability in the development process in Indo-Pacific. Connectivity will also ensure the peace dividend in this region, which is so important for building peaceful markets and production networks. Moving forward, digitalization and human capital development are two crucial solutions tackling the emerging challenges. Structural transformation and employment generation policies in developing Asia and the Pacific must understand, prepare, respond to the new digital economy. As the digital economy, new economy will affect the patterns and the geographical location of industries, employment, trade, and economic growth. Increased industrialization and participation in the global value chains are important for growth and employment generation in several less developed countries. The rapid digital transformation and its unprecedented potential demand effective data governance. The globally renowned India Stack proves this region can offer innovative solutions instead of solely looking at some model given from other parts of the world. Future data governance should draw inspiration from success in India and ASEAN. I mean, in this growing economic powerhouse to build a fairer, more secure, reliable, and trustworthy data governance for the Indo-Pacific. Effective data governance fuels supply chain resilience, ensuring clear visibility, informed decision, and agile responses in the face of disruption. Additionally, geographical inclusiveness is an important aspect in the Indo-Pacific architecture. The role of smaller countries, especially the LDCs and the Pacific Island countries, which are new entrants to the regional connectivity plan, is significant for monitoring economic performance and inclusive mandate of the Indo-Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, my colleague, the moderator, Ms. Anita, tasked me to, promote her publication. It's a good book, excellent contents. So I have to say is in this context. So if you have time later, please read and look at it. Thank you very much opportunity, and I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Watanabe-san. Now may I invite His Excellency Do Hung Viet, Deputy Foreign Minister of Vietnam, to deliver the scene setter, please.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, colleagues and friends. It's a great honor for me to be here today and address this very distinguished gathering. When Minister Jaishankar mentioned and encouraged us to attend the Raisina Dialogue, when we hosted him at the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam last October, I really made it a point that I had to attend the forum this year. So it's again truly an honor for me to be here, and I would like to thank the ORF, the Ministry of External Affairs of India, for your kind invitation and on the arrangements. Now, I've been asked to set the scene for this conversation this morning on de-securitizing development, with a particular focus on the Indo-Pacific region. I imagine that this task would have been much easier if we were living in the dark days of the Cold War, when there were clear-cut rivalries and the battle of the two blocs. But today we are faced with a complex array of challenges that transcend mere geopolitical competition. For billions of people worldwide, and in particular in our region, the most pressing issues are often less about security, traditional security competition, and more about the immediate daily critical concerns. These include, of course, the impacts of climate change, of epidemics, of economic disruptions, of supply chain disruptions, of the widening gap between the rich and the poor as our economies evolve and grow. And for all these challenges, there are technical solutions. There are plenty of forums for member states, for governments to discuss these solutions. But I believe that the crux of the matter lies in embracing a fundamentally new paradigm. We must reconceptualize our region, not as an arena for superpower rivalry, but as the arena for cooperation to fight against exactly climate change and to achieve sustainable development. We must make a collective shift in perspective and craft a new narrative for our region. Now, Yuval Noah Harari, author of The Sapiens, made a compelling case that narratives form the bedrock of human history. For thousands of years, we humans have tried to make sense of the world we are living in and our role in it through narratives. Those in leadership positions have long understood that power is not pure might, but it is also exercised through the stories that nations purposefully craft and propagate. By offering a coherent and persuasive vision, these strategic narratives can serve as a lens through which actions are interpreted and therefore understood, which in turn help mobilize support and create and manage coalitions. Major powers in particular have enlisted the power of narratives as they seek decisive advantage in an all-out competition. Now, geographical descriptors such as Asia-Pacific and Indo-Pacific have now been turned into geopolitical rallying points. Some advocate for a free and open Indo-Pacific, and others insist on an Asia for Asians and by Asians. These opposing narratives clearly clash, yet they converge on one crucial point. They both prioritize traditional security concerns over everything else. This singular focus on security overlooks the importance of addressing everyday challenges such as climate change and epidemics and economic disparities, social development, connectivity, resilience, which are fundamental to this region's long-term stability and prosperity. Viewing everything through the security lens also runs the risk of deepening divisions in a region defined by diversity, and also risk eroding the already very fragile regional architecture. Without a unifying and inclusive narrative, it would be difficult to avoid being entrapped in power struggles and focus on pressing development issues. This is why I believe that like-minded countries in this region should work together and actively push for a new narrative for our region, based on the principles of peace, inclusivity, sustainability, and shared prosperity. This narrative emphasizes the need to view this region as an inclusive and peaceful ground, which is home to diverse nations and dynamic economies, and not merely a geopolitical battleground, as it is sometimes inappropriately being framed. The stories of the complicated developments in the South China Sea, for example, is sometimes told as stories of major power contestation. This is not wrong, but it would blur the fact that they are caused by excessive and unlawful maritime claims and unilateral acts, including militarization of the seas, behaviors that really threaten the peace and stability of this region. Similarly, the primary threats and challenges that the Mekong sub-region continues to face are the severe threats from climate change and unsustainable utilization of natural resources. Now, this highlights the importance for this narrative to recognize the interconnectedness of today's geopolitical landscape and the challenges that we face, and therefore emphasize the vital role of multilateral cooperation, constructive dialogue, and prosperity for all, important values and principles that Vietnam and more broadly ASEAN embrace. Vietnam is committed to work with partners in ASEAN and beyond to champion this new strategic narrative, which envisions a resilient and inclusive network of nations to champion dialogue over dominance and cooperation over confrontation, to build a green zone of peace, stability, and sustainable development. If our region should ever be viewed as a battleground, it should only be the battleground where we fight against climate change and unsustainable development. I see that I have 30 more seconds, so allow me to do a bit of advertising because the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam will be hosting this April a ASEAN Future Forum, which would hopefully provide a efficient forum for people like you, like us, to come and share thoughts, innovative ideas and recommendations for a prosperous, inclusive, dynamic future for ASEAN and the broader region. So I very much look forward to seeing many of you at our forum this April. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. And now I hand over to you, Anita, to continue with the discussion.
Thank you, Tanobi. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have a very eminent panel with us here today, and without wasting any time further, very quickly we start with the session, and I will start actually with Anjali, and the reason I start with her is because the US is at the center of all security and economic narratives at play in the Indo-Pacific. So Anjali, please tell us, is there any possibility for building a coalition of partners or even partnerships for materializing resilient infrastructure and supply chains in Indo-Pacific, in which US has a major role?
Great, thanks. Great. First, I want to thank you all for joining us here today. I see such great interest in this topic, and not only because the Indo-Pacific is a rallying cry, but hopefully because we can change the strategic narrative. So the US government just celebrated its second anniversary of the Indo-Pacific strategy. And in line with that, the US Agency for International Development has really put together their vision on how we approach the Indo-Pacific strategy. And that vision is very much in efforts to what you had mentioned, which is we look at security in the Indo-Pacific, but we also look at development and the critical role that development plays, especially as we think about the 3 Ds that we believe in, which is defense, development, and diplomacy, and how they intersect with one another. And that especially happens in this region. So I just wanted to give you a sense in terms of our strategic approach, what we are prioritizing. And Anita, to your point, everything that we have done, we work closely with our partners and friends within the region, but also beyond the region to make substantial progress and celebrate historic milestones towards these core objectives, which are strengthening democratic institutions to support good governance and human rights, which is really falling under the notion of being free and open, fostering sustainable, inclusive, and transparent economic growth. And this is really pushing this notion of being connected and prosperous across the region. And then lastly, really looking to improve resilience to health and climate threats. So pushing resilience across the board in the region. And I want to highlight a few examples of how this looks and where we've succeeded, but also the fact that we're stock taking. 2 years in, we're really looking at where's our footprint been effective and where has it not? Where do we need to expand our efforts? We look at the Pacific and East Asia quite frequently when we think about the Indo-Pacific, but how do we move beyond that and really think about South Asia as well and the Indian Ocean region beyond? So let me just give you a great example of being able to strengthen democratic institutions. We have, through this work, been able to train and support over 10,000 human rights defenders in the Indo-Pacific region. We've also been able to support the government of Maldives in reforms to increase accountability and transparency, providing budgetary preparation, supporting and enabling 57 accountable government agencies to produce the first ever program basis budgets. You can imagine how critical that is when you see countries that are not only struggling with economic reforms and economic issues across the region, but really thinking about institutional strengthening and how do we focus on that through our efforts. When we look at fostering sustainable, inclusive, and transparent economic growth, we've really looked at launching the Asian Open RAN Academy, which has trained 783 university students and engineers in the Philippines on Open RAN, open radio access network technology, adoption, and rollout. We all know this is the future. And so getting ahead and really figuring out where those hotspots are and how we can make that difference and connecting that across the region, we see is going to be groundbreaking. We've also been able to support the implementation of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations single window by upholding World Trade Organization trade facilitation agreements and provisions. I want to move on to the last core objective, which is improving resilience to health and climate threats. We've been able to reduce over 3.8 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in greenhouse gas emissions through clean energy activities, and over 15 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gas emissions reduced through sustainable landscape activities. I have to say these numbers because this is a big deal in the region. When we've got a region, just when we're looking at BIMSTEC and whatnot, this is over 25% of the population, the world's population. So you can think about how this impact will affect future generation. We've also been able to mobilize nearly 200 million from public and private sector resources towards clean energy projects, over 291 million to promote sustainable landscapes, and over 277 million to support climate change adaptations. Once again, the numbers tell their own story, so I think that's so important to be able to highlight where the progress is being made, and where we're not seeing that, how do we need to start pivoting so we can start seeing that change happen? I know I'm at time, so thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you very much. From US, I think we should come down to the actual experience, how it is being felt at the ground. And I would ask Dulciana, please tell us some of the challenges that smaller economies in Indo-Pacific are facing. And the PNG's experience will be very important in this. Please share with us some of the experiences.
Thank you, Anita. Good morning, everyone. Yes, so in relation to context, I'm from Papua New Guinea. We have a population, we think, of about 11.5 million kina. I say that very specifically because of the importance of a vacuum in data collection. We're incredibly diverse. We have about 900 different languages, which is the equivalent of 900 different planets living on a small landmass. We're very much unlike many other Pacific Islanders. While we're Melanesian, and we have 3 different subregions in the Pacific Islands, Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. In Melanesia, we make up the largest population. I think we also boast the greatest number of extractives in natural resources from gold, gas, oil, cobalt, nickel, fisheries, forestry, oil palm, tea, coffee, vanilla, you name it. So in terms of primary industry, we haven't been the masters of developing industry as a secondary opportunities for internal revenue. Now I speak only for Papua New Guinea. I can't speak for the other nations in the Pacific or the sub-region. In terms of context and in terms of resilience, I think the importance of the high-level theme that we're discussing here today, and that is unlearning the narratives, unlearning development. In Papua New Guinea, we have a 24% contribution of mining to our internal revenue. Our GDP is the equivalent of, I think, $29 billion US, which is approximately 112 billion kina, made up of tax revenue, and various other contributions from different subsectors. When we look at the social and the socio-economic context where investment meets our daily lives, we're now faced with some challenges. Port Moresby, the capital city, is suffering from in-migration and exponential growth. And when I say exponential growth, I think we're looking at 3.4% of population growth per annum, which is the equivalent, I'm told, of about 400,000 babies being born a year. Now, according to our own criteria in the country, that's the equivalent of a province, the establishment of an individual province. When you think of exponential population growth, the youth bulge, you look at maternal and infant mortality rates, our inability to be able to meet social development indicators according to SDGs and our own development priorities and legal frameworks and regulatory parameters. We're now dealing with a very, very big country, with the world that is coming to us. Last year alone, we had presidents and prime ministers from India and Australia. The American president didn't make it to Papua New Guinea based on a congressional issue, but sent a high-level representative. The pivot is real, but I think what's more realistic for my people is the reality that we're not able to give access to basic services to our people. Water supply, power supply, energy has been a remarkable challenge for us. The high cost of doing business in Papua New Guinea is highly punitive on Indigenous populations, but also to our visitors and investors. You may have each seen or not, the coverage that happened in an internal security matter on the 10th of January in the capital city, where we had riots. And that was basically the result of broken chains of command, weak systems, weaker governance, and political instability. So as we speak of the issues of climate, and I speak from a very personal view as against representing a government or any other organisation, our greatest challenge will be population, will be educating and giving the opportunity to our youth, which I understand is about 35% of our population. We also suffer from an unemployable sector as opposed to an unemployed sector. The promise of high impact projects has not equated to jobs. It hasn't equated to economic growth. When I say that, we're not foreign to the concept of foreign investment and economic growth. In our lifetime and in our very recent history, we were able to achieve double-digit economic growth from the period of about 2002 to about 2011 in an economic global downturn, where we were able to, convert our high-level petrochemical projects with investors ranging from Japan and America, Australia, South Korea, in our biggest LNG project. And to continue to speak to the issues of climate and resilience. I come from an area in my country where the largest river, the Sepik River, is 1,000 kilometres of river. I come from 11 villages at the river basin where the river meets the sea. We have oil palm projects. We have the second largest rainforest basins in the world. We also have incredible fish stocks, particularly high quality tuna for niche markets in Japan. We benefit from the Asia-Pacific region and the border. We have an invisible line that separates us on the island of Papua New Guinea to Indonesia. West Papua is next door. We have amazing supply chain opportunities. Now, when I describe the area that I come from, my people are at the coalface of climate change, rising sea levels, rising temperatures in our mangrove ecosystems. We may be able to participate in the lucrative demand of fisheries and marine products in the countries in the Asia-Pacific region, but for the fact that we suffer from the support that is being received through donor support, through investment, and from our own governments not reaching our people. We have major subnational delivery and implementation and enforceable regulatory and legislative issues. I'm conscious of time, but I'd just like to give you an example of the reality of the difference between in Port Moresby, we're a booming metropolis with trendy cafes and bars and restaurants, and a concentration of the wealth of my country operating in Port Moresby, with the likes of ExxonMobil, Total, and various other foreign investors. From my village, only 3 hours away, We are struggling. We live like we did 40,000 years ago, according to the way in which our ancestors lived. Our biggest problem will be land. Our populations are growing. We are unable to resettle, firstly in the absence of respectable frameworks that mean that our people can move from one jurisdiction, indigenous jurisdiction, to another. As we face development, we are now forced, our people lack the services, and we have had to move to urban centres. In the absence of the services, there's overcrowding. There are the equivalent of shanty towns, which is not a foreign concept to our part of the world, but it is a foreign concept to Indigenous people who have lived a remarkably respectable identity and civilization for 40,000 years until very recently. The rising sea levels and the knock-on effect.
Delciana, you will have to wrap it up now, please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to give the biggest snapshot of my country so we can speak to some of those issues. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you, Delciana. We'll continue this conversation after this session also. We have two more experts who are conversant with the issues of resilient infrastructure, but more importantly, financing of resilient infrastructure. So, Emmanuel and Osone-san, both of them are the experts that I mentioned. Emmanuel, I go with you first. Tell us, climate risks are coming up again and again in this conversation. How are we working on some kind of a partnership or coalition where financing for infrastructure, or more specifically resilient infrastructure, can be actually made a reality in Indo-Pacific?
Thank you very much, Anita. I'm very pleased to be in this panel with these distinguished panelists. Just to share the point of view of a financial institution and the French Public Development Bank on SDG and climate change in a such important region than Indo-Pacific, where you have basically half of the worldwide population, half of the greenhouse gas emission, half of the biodiversity in the world, and some of the top countries facing natural disaster. We strongly believe that we need, in this region and in the world, to find collective ways to reconcile economics and social and environment and climate change, meaning dealing both with the jobs, poverty, alleviation, job creation, prosperity and economic growth, and at the same time fighting against climate change, protecting environment and biodiversity. And you know, during the last summit held in Paris for a new global financing pact that was held in last June, President Macron really called for let us not choose between tackling poverty and addressing climate change. And I think this is the sense of what we are doing in sustainable infrastructure. Sustainable infrastructure, we consider that they are dedicated infrastructure who address both. And we would like to share maybe two areas where we can better cooperate all together. The first one is strengthen public policies. Sustainable infrastructure is not only about construction of infrastructure, it's really the whole environment of this. And I'm sure we'll talk about private investment later, but making some public policies pro SDGs, pro investment, based on science, based on long-term assessment, is very key if we want to design some sustainable infrastructure. And I would like to give you a few areas where we have good cooperation. I guess we can increase that. The first is in Vietnam, colleagues of Vietnam, where we have a strong cooperation on the impact assessment on climate change, on social and economics of the country. And we have developed together a model mixing both the climate change and macroeconomic, which is useful for both of us to better assess the risk. In other countries, we have also this assessment of risk of transition, meaning what would be in 30 years in a world where, for example, the coal trade is much difficult. What will be the impact in a country like South Africa on the industry, on the financial system, on the budget of the government? What are the long-term impact of climate change? And the last example of such long-term assessment and long-term tools is the work done by the Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, the CDRI, work on modeling the risk of disaster in infrastructure, showing the area where the risk is major and we should invest massively in sustainable infrastructure to avoid such a risk and reduce the cost of future impact of the climate change. So basically, strengthening public policy we consider as a key and really pushing for more cooperation. That the second area is investment. Investment, of course, is key if we want to have sustainable infrastructure. Again, it's not only about energy, transport, water and sanitation. We're talking about health. We have seen COVID and the need to have laboratories in each country, to have health system, to have education infrastructure, to have sports infrastructure, to have a number. It is estimated that if we want to reach the SDG, we should invest around $6 trillion per year, which is massive, every year up to 2030 in sustainable infrastructure, if we want to address both the SDGs and climate. This is massive, and no government budget can face that. I'm sure my colleague from Investment Capital will show the importance of private investment, and we strongly believe that private investment is key if we want to address this sustainability. I want to highlight one key stakeholder in that investment side, both to address public needs and private investor that we need, is the key role of Public Development Bank. I'm not talking about only international public development bank like the MDBs, like AFD or German KfW or JICA in Japan. I'm talking about the national, the BIDV in Vietnam, the DBS in South Africa, BNDES in Brazil, and IIF in India, and a number of them. There are more than 500 in the world. They represent more than $20 trillion of assets and make 10% of the worldwide investment. These public development banks are key because they have a public mandate given by their governments or their region to address public investment, most of it. But they have capacity to work with the private sector. They have banking procedures. They have ways to address environment, social, technical, financial investment. And we really believe that they should be more activated. And I take this floor to end, since there's so many ministers and so many countries in this world, really to take this opportunity that you have Public Development Bank, give them more mandate to address investment in sustainable development goals. So poverty, growth, economic and social, and climate change. And give them more mandate, give them more means, more capital in order to address this issue.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Thank you. Without breaking this link to finance, I will also come back to Yamamoto-san. Your experience is forensic in terms of capital investment in resilient infrastructure and quality infrastructure, which is the need for Global South and the Indo-Pacific broadly. Please tell us how the private sector can actually be engaged in this process, and just building upon what Emmanuel has just spoken. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, giving me this opportunity to speak up. I'm a pretty minority from the private sector, so I'll be brief. But I talk about the gap and the reason of the gap, and I'll talk about the solution. First, Japan. Japan has the largest pension fund in the world. It is called GPIF, Government Pension Investment Fund. The size of that is mind-boggling, 1.8 trillion USD. But Anita, take a wild guess. What percentage of that 1.8 trillion USD invested in this region? 0%. 0%. Okay? That's the gap. That's the gap I'm talking about. And why this is relevant? If my company decided to raise a fund for Papua New Guinea to fight against the climate change, my boss is GPIF. Or it's not really a GPIF, but an asset owner. We call them asset owners. Okay, asset owners are the boss of us. We are the asset allocators. Okay, that's a gap. So whenever I bring this idea, they say no. That's not because they don't understand the narrative you just kindly shared with us. Far from it. And the minister, they understand your narrative too. There's a huge immediate threat in this region, right? And the private capital should be the solution to that. They do understand that narrative. But where the gap is? The gap is between social impact and sound financial return, risk-adjusted return. We call this risk-adjusted return, okay? And the GPIF is not a bad guy. They are very good people, okay? But they have their own mandate and their own approach, and they have their own governance. In the US, my colleagues, they have ERISA. It's a legislation, right? It's a mandate. You cannot deviate from that mandate. And everybody in this room is a constituent because that's your pension that this system is gardening and making a return for. That's a dilemma, okay? So they understand the narrative. But because of the very existence of their mandate, approach, and governance, they cannot be so proactive to making private sector investment in this region in particular, whatever the region is, whatever the topic is. Solution. Later today, I'm on the panel talking about the MDB reform. And Emmanuel will talk about the MDB's role. I cannot echo you more. And the reason why I cannot echo you more is that the MDB is a key to bridge this gap. GPIF, for example, will be able to talk to JICA, you mentioned, or JVIC. Both are the development bank from Japan. And they have their own database, and they know they have a professional staff, and these MDBs has a skill to convert this social impact into the measurable risk-adjusted return. That's what we need. And so that's why my proposal to all of you is let's invite more asset owners in this forum so that we can first hear from them and also we can tell what we need. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you so much, Yamamoto-san, also for your very, very smart timekeeping. Kate, there's a reason why I have kept you for the end. Indian Ocean is the sort of a binding link in the Indo-Pacific, the kind of a default geographical definition. And you have worked in the smaller island states in Indian Ocean. And smaller island states actually are the barometer, or I should say the monitoring instrument for testing the performance, the inclusiveness, the resilience, the sustainability. Everything box can be checked against the smaller island states. Your experience in working in these countries and how these challenges can be met or addressed within the Indo-Pacific architecture. Kate.
Hello, everyone. There's nothing like being the last speaker on the third day of a conference early in the morning with a red light flashing at you. So let me try and I will be brief. So as Anita mentioned...
I'm giving you special and extra time.
So a bit of context about me. I work at the Perth US Asia Centre, which is an Indo-Pacific foreign policy think tank in Western Australia. But until very recently, I was an Australian diplomat for many years, and I was the Australian High Commissioner to Mauritius, Seychelles, and Ambassador to Comoros and Madagascar. As Anita set me up nicely, the top line message of my intervention is I think we can't talk about resilience in the Indo-Pacific if we're not talking about islands and oceans. I'm super pleased to be on this panel with a colleague from the Pacific Ocean side of the Indo-Pacific. If we care about the health of the planet, we care about the health of oceans. If we care about the health of oceans, we can't do that without working with the expertise of Pacific and Indian Ocean island states. So, everyone is tired at this point in the conference, and I thought I might just share two examples that illustrate that. And one's on the vulnerability side, and then the other one is on the side of the power of cooperation and the power of small states. So on the vulnerability side, my personal and witnessed experience as the High Commissioner in the Western Indian Ocean region during COVID, I want to use the example of Seychelles. Island state, 100,000 people. It graduated from aid eligibility in 2018. It has the highest gross national income in Africa. So that's good. That's out of 54 countries. 75% of its GDP comes from tourism. So when COVID hit, it had to shut its borders like everyone else. Very, very quickly, its coffers were dry. So when it came to the point where Seychelles was looking for COVID vaccines, it had very few aid donors. It had no money coming into its treasury. And the president and the foreign minister had to get on planes and go and personally beg countries to donate COVID vaccines to them. I'm telling you this story because it gives an illustration of the vulnerability of island states. What are frameworks that we can use to address that? The UN set up a high-level panel that released a report in September last year. Write this down. It's called the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index that they developed. This index really helps us engage with Pacific and Indian Ocean and island states and small states to understand the complexity of their vulnerabilities. It recognises that you might have a high GNI, but a high GNI times 100,000 people doesn't add up to much financial resilience when you face a challenge. So you have a country like, say, Maldives, that when you look at GNI, it's somewhere in the middle of the pack. But on the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, it's the second most vulnerable country in the world. So I mentioned that to you because the UN asks that donors and private lenders take this index into account when you think about working with small states. So that's vulnerability. And then a quick example on power of small states. In 2011, and I'm using a Pacific example, 8 Pacific Island nations banded together to form an agreement. It's called the Nauru Agreement. They're parties to the Nauru Agreement, and it's about fishing. In 2011, most of those Pacific Island states that have access to the most tuna in the world actually only got 2.5% of the profits from that tuna fishing. How very outrageous, and those Pacific Island states were pretty sick of it because foreign fishing fleets came in and they paid by the catch. Under this agreement, they said, no more. You're going to pay by the day. Pay for the right to be in our region and fish. We don't care if you catch a lot or a little, you've got to pay the fee. As a result of this agreement, take a Pacific Island state like Kiribati. In 2011, they used to get $27 million a year from their tuna fishing, 2.5% of the profit. In 2021, they got $160 million. They were able, with these profits, to also protect 10% of their marine areas, and they've increased their spending on health and education. So I wanted to finish on a positive example to say, while island states face enormous challenges, we have to think about working with them. We have to acknowledge that they are experts in their region, and we have to acknowledge the power of them working together has something to teach all of us about building Indo-Pacific resilience. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you immensely, Kate. And please give a big hand to all our experts. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for this very interesting panel. I'm Alize from France, from the AFGG Young Fellows. I would have one question actually on the small states, because as you said, they are at the forefront regarding climate change, but at the same time, they have a lot of parallel financial actors that comes to them actually to offer financings. But sometimes regarding the parallel process, it's actually it's a burden more for them. So my question is, how can you cooperate better? Would it be through co-financings? Would it be through creating fiduciary funds? How could we ease the process for them to tackle this issue? Thank you.
Your question is addressed to?
To all of the panelists.
Emmanuel and Yamamoto-san on financing. Would you be able to answer this? Emmanuel, first.
My colleague is French, so I should be the first to answer. No, again, small islands gather a number of risk, and we need also to support financing. And again, financing is not only constructing in infrastructure. Is dealing with the public policies, is working with the authorities and working with the local actors. Of course, it's more difficult sometimes to make some large investor like private to invest, but at least there's a number of things that we need to do in developing local economies with fishing ports, with marine protected area, also with the investment in the energy transition, which is quite specific in small island, and how to ease the process. But it's not obvious. Again, if you have local development bank, let's work with them. They are within the country. They know the public stakeholder. They know how to deal with private. So let's work with them.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
My name is Sugandha Narayanan, and I'm a retired central government employee. So my question is to you. You spoke about cooperation, increasing cooperation with like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific, but nobody curiously mentioned China in the entire Indo-Pacific discussion that we had, but I want to bring that in. Given the fact that you have very close trade relations with China, and if you increase your strategic cooperation in other countries, do you think you will be met with some punitive actions from China, especially in the Mekong River case? China being the upper riparian state can really punish you by stopping the water. Have you taken that into consideration? Thank you.
Can we take one or two questions more and then we'll come back?
Thank you. My name is Tess Newton-Kane. I'm from the Griffith Asia Institute in Brisbane. My question is primarily for Dulciana, but Kate may also want to comment. Going beyond the technical, which we've heard a lot about this morning, I'd like to get your thoughts on a more kind of underpinning issue. So Anna Naupur and I have written for a forthcoming publication in which we seek to challenge this paradigm of what we've called projectization of the Pacific and of Pacific people. So in terms of actually securing development aspirations, whether as Pacific policymakers or as their development partners, how do we get beyond this paradigm of the project and what is the next paradigm?
Thank you very much. I'm Kento of JBIC, Japanese policy-based financial institution. We are focusing on encouraging private investment and supporting infrastructure projects in Pacific Island countries with US and Australia. But we are now struggling to make the project bankable because of the scale of each country's economy. So my question is to Emmanuel-san. How to enhance the credit of each project in Pacific Island countries? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think there are two issues here that you wanted to ask. One, and I have a very simple answer to the first part of it. Does China punish us for strengthening our relations with other major powers? I think The simple answer is can be seen through the last month of last year. President Biden visited us, and I think a month later, President Xi visited us. We upgraded our relationship with the US to a comprehensive strategic partnership, which is the highest level of partnership that we have with any other nation. We have that with India as well. There were, of course, concern that China may react in a negative way, but the truth is, as I said, a month later, President Xi visited Vietnam, agreed on a wide range of issues that we would work on to strengthen our bilateral relations. And we have, in fact, seen already the fruits of that cooperation in terms of trade, in terms of more investment, the Chinese investment. So again, the simple answer is no. Number two, would China use, say, the Mekong to punish us? Again, it's not in their interest, I believe, because what we are concerned about is the unsustainable use of the water in Mekong. They have already built, dozens of dams in the Lansang part of the river. There are also plans in the lower Mekong Basin to develop about a dozen of dams as well. So that is what we are concerned about, and that is what we have been working with countries in this region to ensure that any development projects would take into account the negative environmental impacts that they would have, and also considering the dual impact of climate change, of rising sea level on countries like Vietnam in the Mekong Delta. Now, if China were to use the Mekong, shutting down the water resource, that would impact not only Vietnam, but Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia. And I don't think any country in this sub-region would imagine using that as a weapon. If we use that logic, Laos can punish Vietnam by shutting all their dams. Cambodia can do the same. But that is, I don't think that is the logic of this. The real need for everyone in this region is how to manage the water resources and other resources in the Mekong in the most efficient, sustainable manner, so that we can all benefit from it. So I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Also, to add to what Minister said just now, this very anecdotal and exclusionary understanding of Indo-Pacific has been dispelled to a large extent in this study. So I really urge people to read some of the chapters that address this anecdotal understanding of Indo-Pacific architecture. Dulciana, your reply to the question on PNG raised by Griffith Asia representative there.
Thank you. Thank you, Tess, for the question on the underpinning paradigm, and yes, the huge discussion that tends to sort of coagulate around the technical. I think importantly, our experience in Papua New Guinea, again, we're unlike other Pacific Island nations. We have massive examples in the private sector of growth and governance. Our superannuation funds are very, very respectable with massive they make massive capital investments in real estate. So with the bad stories are very, very exceptional stories. In terms of empowering our people, we are the asset owners, as Mr. Yamamoto has described, and we have opportunities for reform within our aid conversation in Papua New Guinea. I think in traditional forms, and with the example of Australia, we went from tide aid to budget support to now massive programs focused on everything from infrastructure to climate to domestic violence to support in sorcery. I think if we're talking about a paradigm shift test, we're really looking at smashing down the barriers or having a more vibrant conversation with our private sector. We have a lot of trapped equity in Papua New Guinea, and it sits squarely within the private sector organisations and with particular reference to the superannuation funds. I think as to the support on grants and concessional borrowings, we have an addiction, if you like, for want of a better term, to borrowings. We have a 60% debt to GDP ratio in Papua New Guinea, which is highly punitive. If we're not able to continuously meet our SDGs and those indicators, we will continue to suffer. And so if we're looking at the addiction, if you like, the enablers have to change the conversation. We're receiving grants, we're receiving concessional borrowings, but we're not being held to our reforms. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And Emmanuel, very quickly, we are wrapping up after this. Your reply to the question from JB representative.
Okay, so regarding securing private investment, just a few words about the work that we have conducted at the summit in Paris with the 60 financial institutions, both private and public, how to better address this need of investment and how to have the best complementarity. First, and that was the private sector and asset owner who really push for investing in public policies. So I've mentioned already, but this is key to have a framework, fair contract for the country and for the investor, to strengthen the capacity, the local capacity to originate more bankable projects and to prepare a bankable project. So having some funds, some capacity for environment and social assessment, technical, financial, and so on. This is part of the securitization of private investment. Of course, we have talked about guarantee, financial guarantee, and push really the MDBs to increase, especially MIGA, the World Bank group tools for providing public guarantee to private investors. But we have also mentioned others way to secure private investment, like non-financial guarantee. I think India is a very good example. I will not talk too much about that, but just give the example of SECI, which is a federal agency in India, gathering all the public demand for renewable energy, small offer, make a big bidding for private investor to have a larger volume of investment and to pay directly to them and then to collect the fund it's another way to secure private investment. Of course, there's others way like sharing risk with public equity fund. I think at AFD we have created one fund on infrastructure, putting some capitals, public capitals to support and to participate in equity in some investment, which is key. Osamu-san, you have mentioned the how to better use the owner asset and pension fund. We believe that secondary market is something that we should test in Indo-Pacific. Secondary market is, and I think you have a good example also in India, is the way that developer investor in the construction phase then sell the asset to long-term investor where the construction phase and the risk is over. And when you have in developed markets, you have such mechanism. Probably this is something on which we should better work.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, and thank you all my panelists here. We need to give them a big hand. And yes.